Hello, I just wanted to make a quick tutorial explaining how to have different behaviors depending on whether you press a key or hold down that same key. So like adding an item to your inventory versus using the item directly from the table. So you'll see here, if I just tap the E key quickly, I'll get short press printed at the top corner. But if I hold the E key down for an extended period of time, I'll instead get a long press. And most importantly, I get that long press without triggering the short press in the process. That was the main problem I needed to overcome and took me some time to find a way around that ended up being pretty simple because you cannot use two separate input actions or you'll get the short press triggered when you're trying to get to the long press. So I'll go ahead and walk you through how to get that same setup that I have here. Alright, so I'm here on a completely fresh third-person template project. This should work in any project though, as long as you have a character linked to an input mapping context. So the first thing I'll do here in this fresh project is actually not directly related to this video, but something that I find helpful and that you may not know about. So I'll quickly go to Editor Preferences and search Open, and I'll change my Asset Editor Open location from the default setting to the main window. This basically just makes it so that when I open a blueprint, so like if I open our default third-person character blueprint, it opens it in a new tab separate from our level like this, rather than opening content files in a whole separate window. So I just like to change that setting. It makes things easier to keep track of when you're working on a single monitor like myself. So now for the actual content we're trying to create for the video, the first thing we'll do is add a new input action. So from the root content folder, we'll go into third person and then we'll go into input. And once we're in this input folder, we will go into actions because we're just going to keep the default third person mapping context and see about adding a new action that accomplishes what we're looking to do. So importantly here, as mentioned earlier in the video, we're only going to want to create one input action here, even though we're looking to have two separate behaviors, because if you create them as two input actions, the longer press will trigger the shorter press, which we are not looking to do. So for this, I guess we could just call it IA short press and long press. Not the most creative name. If you know what you're planning to use it for, you could probably use that like IA pick up or add to inventory, or pick up or use rather, so that it's only exhibiting one of those behaviors. So once we create that new input action, we're just going to go ahead and open it up. And a couple of things we're going to want to do here. First, we'll add a new trigger. And for the trigger, we're going to make it a hold trigger. And for now, we're just going to set up a hold input. We'll add the separate press functionality to it in the blueprint, which I'll show you how to do shortly. So for now, just set it as a hold and then open this drop down. For this video, I'm going to set the hold threshold to 3 seconds. This essentially should just be however long you want the user to have to hold the button down to activate the long press version of the input. And I'm also going to tick the is one shot box. This just makes it so that when you hold the key down for however many seconds you set the threshold to, it will only activate the ability one time. If you leave that as the default, it'll just keep spamming the ability until you let go of the key. So that's all we need to change here in the action. And now we will add the action into the context. So we'll just navigate back one folder and open up the context, knock down the mappings here and add a new one, and just assign this to that input action that we just created, and tick that box down, and pick whatever button you would like to assign this to. For the sake of this video, I'm just going to use the E key because I think that makes sense for the use case of picking up an item versus using it directly off the table. And that's all we need to edit here because we already set up the trigger and the input action itself. So we'll go ahead and save this. Now, next, we will go to the player blueprint. And if you're using the default third person template, or any template really will have this by Unreal. This code will already be here to link the input mapping with the character. But if you're using a different input mapping or a different character, make sure you include this code or the rest of this will not work. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and right click here in a blank space and search. And we're going to search for that input action that we just created. So I'll type it in short press. And we want the event, not the value. Very important here. So grab the version under Enhance Action Events. And we're going to want to click this arrow here to expand it out and show us all of the possible values. So just to briefly cover these, there are tutorials out there that go much more in depth into what all of these do. But just to explain it enough for comprehension for this video, for a hold action specifically, the triggered event will fire whenever the key is actually held for whatever we set the threshold to. So for our example, we set the hold threshold to 3 seconds. So if I hold the E key down for 3 seconds without letting go of it, the triggered event will fire one time. The started event fires the moment it detects I press the E key. So it will fire that off as soon as it detects an E input comes in. That's the start of a hold being registered. Ongoing will fire on tick for as long as you're continuing to hold the button. And while you're continuing to hold the button and the triggered threshold has still not yet been met, so while it's still counting up to the threshold. Canceled, very important one, will trigger when you started holding down the key but let go of it before the threshold was reached. This is going to be the star of our show for today's video. And completed is after the event triggers and finishes all of its associated triggering behavior and is considered fully complete, a complete cycle of the input firing off. Okay, so for this video, we're going to do this into two print statements. So when the event is triggered, so again, this is when the button is held down for the number of seconds we defined in the action, we're going to simply just print long press. So we now have the hold input fully functioning and working. But to make this also work for our short press, we're going to drag out of canceled, which again is when we started holding down the key but released it before the threshold was met. And we're going to print a short press here. And then just to make this code even a little bit cleaner, we're going to make use of our elapsed seconds here. So this value is however much time has passed since the E key was detected, so since the started event was triggered, and the time between then and whatever you're currently at whenever this value is called. So we're going to check if it's less than 1 second and put that into a branch that gets checked every time the canceled event is fired, which I can hold the B key and left click to create a branch quicker and not have to search for branch. But I could also just search for it here if I preferred. So when the event is canceled, we'll first go into this branch and we'll check if I was holding the button down for less than 1 second. And if I was, then we'll trigger the short press. But I like to add this in so there's now like a buffer in the middle. So say like I go up to an item on a wall and I start to hold down the E key and you see the meter filling up for me about to use the item, but I let go right before I use it. I prefer to have no behavior occur in that case because I feel that it can be a bit awkward if you held down the button for a good amount of time and let go at the last second. You probably weren't trying to do a short press, you were starting to do a long press and decided not to follow through on it at the last second. So just to make sure that a short press only occurs if you quickly press and release the button, I do this check here to ensure that you held the button down for less than a second, and it will only trigger the short press if that is the case. So now we will just go ahead and test this out. Should be everything we need. So if I just tap E, we'll get a short press. If I hold E down for longer than 1 second, but less than 3 seconds, we'll get nothing as expected. And if I hold the key down all the way to the threshold of 3 seconds, then we'll get a long press. Thank you for tuning in to this tutorial. I hope it was helpful and I hope it saves you time.